Welcome. My name is Glenn Drover, and this is a short presentation on the large battery opportunities in New South Wales. The New South Wales Government has indicated that around 75% of its coal generators may close by 2035 or even earlier. As a result, the New South Wales Government wants to see 12 gigawatts of new transmission capacity by 2030 and 3 gigawatts of new firm capacity in New South Wales. The firm capacity could be made up of pumped hydro, batteries, or gas peaking plant, although the gas peaking plant is looking less likely. This would represent over 30 billion in private energy investments over the next decade, and in particular, the New South Wales Government has asked for energy storage with over 8 hours of capacity. New South Wales released its electricity infrastructure roadmap in November 2020, and this complemented the electricity strategy which was released 1 year earlier. The roadmap continues New South Wales Government's commitments to develop the renewable energy zones that have been identified in New South Wales and the establishment of a transmission development scheme which ensures that adequate transmission will be available in those renewable energy zones to allow the renewable energy projects to develop. New South Wales Government has also announced a 17,000 megawatt renewable energy investment target for those 3 renewable energy zones. Quite importantly, these policies are supported by the Electricity Infrastructure Investment Safeguard. This will allow the New South Wales Government, if it deems it is necessary, to provide support to some of these investments if it thinks the market requires support from the government. It hasn't indicated anything in particular would come from this yet, but it is there in the legislation. This chart shows the change expected in New South Wales from the existing 60,000 gigawatt hours a year generation now, which is predominantly, as you see from the black part of this bar chart on the left, predominantly coming from black coal at the moment. The change over the next decade to 2031-32 is reasonably modest, although many analysts think that this could actually occur faster than this and that the black coal generation level in 2031 may already be less than this 40,000 gigawatt hour indication here. But then the significant change would occur just after that in the following decade, where you can see the black coal generation drop significantly from around 40,000 gigawatt hour down to only around 10,000 gigawatt hour. And importantly, as the wind, solar, and distributed solar amounts increase quite significantly, to be almost 50,000 gigawatt hour, a significant amount of storage comes into play, and that is where the big battery opportunities come in as well. This is the AEMO Integrated System Plan, and this is the outcome that would happen if we followed the step change scenario. At the moment, the significant growth of renewables is already following this step change scenario, which when this was first envisaged as a scenario was considered something that would only occur with significant policy support. But at the moment, there is significant wind and solar investment and rooftop solar as well, which is following this path. This path would take us from around 70,000 megawatts of generation capacity now through to around 140,000 megawatts of generation capacity over the next 2 decades. As you see by this red dotted line, the aim is to still have around 40,000 megawatts of dispatchable or controllable generation. And so where this is reduced in terms of the brown and the black coal here, the increased amount comes from this dispatchable energy storage. So this is the light blue colour here, and we'll go into some more detail on that in some of the next slides. One of the questions being asked, and I mentioned earlier, is whether or not there would be gas peaker stations or whether batteries or energy storage may be built instead. Now, this is a very complicated chart, but what it does is it highlights that these three lines are based on the prices estimated for batteries. And so this is the 2020, the current estimates of battery costs. And on the left axis here is how does a battery compare to running a gas peaking generator, and based on the different amounts that you might pay to charge up your battery. So as you charge up the battery with cheaper and cheaper electricity, if you can get off-peak electricity or excess solar in the middle of the day, the lower amounts of electricity charge cost, which are in the bottom half of this graph, means that it's equivalent to a cheaper price of natural gas. So just to stick to this 2020 line, that at the current price of batteries, if you were charging them up at the average $50 per megawatt hour, which the NEM tends to run at a lot of the time, it means that with the current price of batteries, it would be equivalent to gas generators where you're paying $14 per gigajoule for the gas. And of course, this is well over the current price. At the moment, gas generators are only paying around $7 per gigajoule for the gas. To get to this 7 gigajoule number, particularly now in 2020 on this red line, it means you'd have to be charging up a battery at around about -$5 per megawatt hour. And that would be very difficult to do consistently. But what you see is as there's an expectation that battery costs will drop by 2025 and then drop significantly by 2030, it brings the equivalent gas price down lower and lower. And so not long after 2025, we're down in this period here where the equivalent price of gas is below $6 a gigajoule or below the current price of gas. So this is a complex chart, but what it's highlighting is that as the expected battery costs drop from 2020 through to 2025 and then through to 2030, that large battery projects will effectively be cheaper than gas turbines unless the gas was at a price less than $6 per gigajoule. And this has already been picked up by some of the major generators and battery builders, as we indicate here. So the New South Wales Government target is for 2,000 megawatts of energy storage projects. And as I said earlier, the New South Wales Government is expecting a mixture of pumped hydro and batteries in that area. So what is happening in the battery space already? I've indicated on that previous chart that if you were building right now, in theory, the peaking gas plants would be cheaper, but there's significant community perception now that people should not be building new gas plants. And so what we're seeing already, even before they seem to be cheaper than gas peaking plants, is that some of the major companies are already diverting their money into large batteries. So for example, in New South Wales, already announced is this second dot point, which is that Transgrid is building a 50 megawatt by 75 megawatt hour battery. Now, admittedly, this one is mostly for grid support features. But then as we move to AGL has proposed a 500 megawatt battery in New South Wales, a 200 megawatt, 800 megawatt hour battery in Victoria, a 250 megawatt, 1000 megawatt hour battery in South Australia, and a 100 megawatt, 150 megawatt hour battery in Queensland. So AGL is one of our top 3 gentailers who well and truly understand the cost of owning and operating gas peaking plant, is making it quite clear to the market that it's putting its new investment money into peaking battery energy storage projects rather than new gas peaking projects. So this is a very important message to the market. Separate to AGL, CEP Energy has announced a 1,200 megawatt battery project in New South Wales, and Neon has announced a 500 megawatt, 1,000 megawatt hour project in New South Wales. Now, only the Transgrid one is actually being built right now, and so some of these projects may not be built to this size, or they may not be built at all. But it does show where the larger companies are already saying that they're going to be spending their money on additional peaking and firming capacity. This is the results of the AEMO Integrated System Plan, and this was for the central scenario, which was the sort of slow and only replacing coal power stations when they reach their end of life. And that this one would have taken us through to 74% renewable in 2042, and that would represent around about 12,000 megawatts of energy storage. I won't dwell on this slide. We'll move to the next slide because it tends to be more where we're already up to. So this next slide is the same view again, but this is for what AEMO call the step change scenario. And the step change scenario achieves 94% renewable in the NEM by 2042. And so just picking up on the two charts, the bottom left one here is the amount of megawatts of energy storage, and it indicates around 23,000 megawatts to be required by 2041-42. And these numbers are over on the table here on the bottom right. So here is the 23,000 megawatts, which comes from this chart here. Similarly, AEMO also charted the amount of energy that would come back out of these different energy storage systems over the 12-month period. And so these are the gigawatt hours per year for each of the different types of energy storage. And these two numbers can be used to indicate how many cycles per year on average that these systems are expected to be operating at. Again, if we come back to this bottom left chart, where we've got 4 different types of energy storage. So shallow at the bottom, which is only 1 to 2 hour batteries, grid batteries, as we've been seeing to date. Then we move into this new category, which as you can see is very small at the moment and only expected to build up over the next decade. And this is the 6 hour or 4 to 12 hour category. And this could be a mixture of batteries and also pumped hydro. Then we move into the deep storage, this dark colour here, and these are effectively the 1 week long pumped hydro energy storage systems. So the one being built at the moment, which is Snowy 2, is 350 gigawatt hour, and then if the Battery of the Nation project proceeds in Tasmania, then that would add another one of around about 300 gigawatt hours per year. So as you can see at the moment, that deep category is around 4,500 megawatts and about 450 gigawatt hour. As I said, Snowy 2 on its own is around 350 gigawatt hour. And then the last category up here in the purple colour is the behind the meter storage. So this is typically batteries that are installed behind the meter in individual residential households, becoming very popular as a means to store and then self-consume excess solar power that the larger rooftop solar systems are storing up during the day. So this gives a fairly good snapshot on all of the different energy storage systems, types, and durations as per this ISP model. This chart is just, again, picking up from the AEMO Integrated System Plan, and it shows the transmission upgrades that would be required for each of these. And so if we look in particular to New South Wales, the transmission upgrades that are proposed are colour-coded. So there are a few black ones there, which are ones that are occurring already. And then stage 1 is the next stage. So you can see a few of these stage 1 projects for New South Wales, particularly towards the renewables energy zones in the south part and then in the west central part of New South Wales. And then later on, stage 2 and stage 3 projects would occur in around about a decade onwards from now. So I hope you found that of some interest, and if there are any questions, please contact me. Thank you.